The Ford Ecosport is one of the most popular local choices for first-time car buyers. However, with the arrival of so many new options within its price segment, can the Ford Ecosport still retain its popularity crown? Well, we do have a 2021 Ford Ecosport Trend automatic right here, and in this video we get to find out if it is still a viable budget mini crossover. Let's do this! Hello guys, I'm Regan and welcome back to another car review. If you're new to my channel, I hope you hit that subscribe button and become part of the Regan's Rides family. If you're my subscriber already, thank you so much for your support. I truly appreciate it. Also, special thanks to Ford Philippines for graciously lending us this Ford Ecosport Trend Automatic for a whole week. The Ecosport used to own the mini crossover segment because there's literally zero competitors back then for the budget crossover level. People who wanted a small car that had a tall ride height and lots of space inside would normally default for the Ford Ecosport, which explains why you see so many of these mini crossovers out on the road. But now, the budget mini crossover segment is getting crowded with more and more options coming from China, all jostling around for position in what was once the Ford Ecosport's domain. The arrival of these new players meant that the Ecosport's pricing is now at the top end of the budget mini crossover pile, with this Ecosport Trend Automatic retailing for 998,000 Philippine pesos. However, for a limited time, the manual variant of the Ecosport Trend is available for 799,000 Philippine pesos, which is a huge discount from its SRP. If you're interested in that promo, you may as well contact the nearest Ford dealer to you. While other budget mini crossovers would go for that sleek and sporty look, the Ford Ecosport went with pure ruggedness, and it makes zero apologies for it. Despite its small footprint, the front fascia of this Ecosport is signature Ford. We get the same grimacing Ford front grille here, and we have this large halogen headlight housing that is mounted quite high. Well, high enough. Now we also have this nice bulging hood right here, which gives the Ecosport an impression of muscle. Now, what I didn't expect to get in this base model Ecosport Trend are a pair of halogen fog lights, but there you go. Now, if you're looking for LED DRLs, you won't find any because, well, this is still a base model variant. Overall, when you look at this front fascia, it has that rugged look down pat, but at the same time, it also carries a degree of refinement. Now, to be honest, guys, I don't really look at these Ford Ecosports when I'm driving down the road, but after having spent 1 week with this car, well then, I must admit, it does have a handsome character to it, doesn't it? The side profile of the Ecosport has more muscular styling that makes this tiny crossover look a little bit bigger. We've got this thick hood line here that extends all the way to the A-pillar, which adds more presence to the Ecosport. Now, when you look at the wheel arches, these wheel arches have a good amount of bulge, which adds more to that SUV styling. Now, we also have the usual plastic body claddings here in the center, which should help protect when you're going on a light off-road trail. Now, Ford even threw in a pair of these blacked out roof rails to complete that SUV look. Now, the wheels entire combo of the Ecosport are large for such a small crossover. These are 17-inch wheels, and they're wrapped in 205/50 R17 tires. Now, I was also surprised to see that behind these wheels, we get 4-wheel disc brakes. Now, this is something that we don't really get in the budget mini crossover segment. Now, when you look at the ground clearance of the Ecosport, you'll see that it has a really good amount of ground clearance, and it's also one of the reasons why a lot of people buy this thing. This is a class leader in the ground clearance department because we get 209 millimeters of ground clearance, which is almost as tall as the Suzuki Jimny. But mind you guys, the Jimny is a 4x4 off-roader, while this Ecosport is a city crossover. So that's not bad. Not bad at all. Now, the rear end of the EcoSport is a class act in itself because it appeals to the titos of Manila who want to have a vehicle that is styled like the old school SUVs and off-roaders. Forget about these halogen taillights and these halogen rear fog lights, although they are nicely designed. The main selling feature of the rear end of the EcoSport is the fact that the spare tire is mounted right here on the tailgate. Now, this is a classic off-roader design that can be found in hardcore SUVs like the Suzuki Jimny or the Toyota Land Cruiser or the Toyota FJ Cruiser. Now, I love the fact that the EcoSport is very consistent with its design theme, where it presents itself as a rugged off-roading SUV despite the fact that it is still a front-wheel drive city crossover. Now, another nifty touch that I love about the EcoSport is the way Ford incorporated the tailgate opener into the taillights. The security guards in the mall will have to take a second or two to determine where the trunk opener is because it is so cleverly hidden and incorporated right here in the tail light. Now, when you pop open this tailgate, you'll see that the EcoSport will give you 352 liters of cargo capacity, which is pretty sizable for such a small car. Now, I also love the fact that the opening is wide and it's quite low as well, despite the high ground clearance of 209 millimeters, and the fact that the rear bumper juts out here, which gives you an added space if you just want to sit down, like what I'm doing now, or if you want to park some stuff there. Now, going to the trunk capacity, 352 liters. How much luggage could we fit there? Well, I have with me my medium-sized luggage, and as you can see, it could easily swallow my medium-sized luggage. We could put a second one, a carry-on luggage on top, and that would be quite all right. Now, we also have some more space here at the side. Now, the good thing here is this trunk space could also fit around 2 weeks worth of groceries for a family of 5. And if you're not believing what I'm saying, well then, click my video above and see the evidence of that. Now, if 352 liters is not enough for you, because you got a lot of stuff to bring, you could always tumble down these second row seats. And when you tumble this down, you'll get almost 1,200 liters of cargo capacity. However, the second row seats don't fold flat to the floor, so that takes 1 point away from its space flexibility. Now, I was quite surprised that this base model EcoSport Trend gets a larger engine displacement than the top spec Titanium, which has a 1-liter turbocharged mill. This EcoSport Trend gets a 1.5-liter 3-cylinder naturally aspirated petrol engine that's good for 121 horses and 150 Newton meters of torque. Now, power is sent to the front wheels via a 6-speed automatic transmission, which also came as a surprise because typically these budget mini crossovers would have a 4-speed or a 5-speed automatic transmission. It was also a good choice from Ford to replace this with a 6-speed automatic transmission coming from the previous dual clutch transmission, which was a bit jerky when it came to stop-and-go traffic. This 6-speed automatic now smoothens that drive. Now, you could also get the EcoSport Trend in a 5-speed manual, which at the time of this filming also has a huge discount. Now, during the week that this EcoSport Trend was with me, I was able to get a fuel economy of 16 kilometers per liter in the highway, but I could only do as much as 7.5 kilometers per liter in the city. I was a bit taken aback by this level of fuel economy because I was expecting a little bit more from such a small city crossover. But well, it is what it is. Now, when I first got inside the cockpit of the EcoSport, I was managing my expectations because I expected it to be a bit of a tight cabin being such a small crossover, but that doesn't seem to be necessary, guys, because, well, this is a pretty spacious cabin. I'm quite surprised, guys, but granted, I'm only 5'6", so that's why I feel that there is a good amount of space inside the EcoSport. Also, the EcoSport is a global model, so it's really built to accommodate larger and taller people than myself. Now, granted, guys, the materials used in the cabin are pretty basic and pretty Spartan, but it doesn't mean that we lose out on some amenities. When you start off with the seats, you'll see that the base model Trend has these fabric seats, which are pretty expected from a base model variant. The seats are also kind of firm, and you don't get too much thigh support here, which is pretty much the hallmark and the nature of econo budget seats. The steering wheel is also not wrapped in leather. This is in a standard urethane, and we don't get cruise control, but we do get hands-free buttons for hands-free connectivity. Now, when you want to adjust the steering wheel, you'll also see that it only adjusts for tilt, and it doesn't telescope, guys. So if you're looking for that perfect driving position, well, you'll have to do the adjustments on the side of the seat rather than the wheel. Now, when you look at the gauges, well, the gauges are a pretty basic and standard analog display here, and the Trend only gets a tiny 2.3-inch multi-information display in the middle, which is really small and really basic, guys. But I'm happy to see that we do get an engine temperature gauge here, something that's normally not found in other offerings at this price point. Now, when you go over to the infotainment system, I was surprised with this because the base model Trend has a larger 9-inch touchscreen infotainment system than the top spec EcoSport Titanium, which only gets an 8-inch screen. However, we don't get Apple CarPlay, there's no Android Auto, but there is Bluetooth connectivity, so that's the only thing. We also get the display of the reverse camera here, and the resolution is, well, it's pretty decent for a budget crossover offering. You also get actual physical knobs and buttons here for those who prefer the analog approach, and we also have a manual climate control system here. Now, speaking of climate control, I kind of noticed that this EcoSport Trend has a pretty weak air conditioning. It may be just because we're filming this in a hot summer day, but this is the first time that I've experienced that even at full blast, the air conditioning doesn't really do much to cool the cabin. It gets cool, but there are other options out there that get a bit colder. Now, when you go to your gear shifter, you'll notice that this gear shifter is pretty simple, guys. You don't really get a manual mode here. Instead, we just get a low gear option for those areas where you have to climb steep inclines or if you're hauling a heavy load. Now, another feature that I noticed with the EcoSport is the fact that we get 20 plus storage spaces. Now, it's quite obvious that the EcoSport is really meant for people who like to store stuff, because aside from getting a large boot space, you also get a lot of cubbies here and there. And as I mentioned, yeah, Ford counts 20. We also get a couple of cup holders here, which just like any other Ford model, guys, it easily passes my clean canteen test. So I put my clean canteen here, bam, yeah, it easily fits in those cup holders. We also get a standard handbrake here and a center armrest that is softly padded, although yeah, it's leather, guys, but not really the good quality leather, just basic leather. Now, when you look at the entire cockpit, as I mentioned, you get really a lot of hard plastics all over, which is pretty much expected from a budget small crossover offering. I also noticed that there is this tiny garnish here on the front passenger area, which reminds me of the Everest garnish on the dashboard, but it's a little smaller, so it's like the puberty version of the Everest dashboard garnish. But it's really quite nice, guys. Now, despite the Spartan materials that are used here, guys, well, the EcoSport's cockpit layout, it's really straightforward, it's really functional, and to be honest, after driving this for a week, I'm kind of liking it. Now, the back seat of the EcoSport defies convention because this is pretty spacious for such a tiny crossover. I'm 5'6", guys, and as you can see, I've got around 6 inches of knee room and a good 5 inches of headroom. Now, that's pretty spacious for such a small crossover. I also noticed that Ford threw in a tiny glass window here at the C-pillar area, which should help add a bit of spaciousness and airiness here at the back. Now, you could sit 2 adults here at the back seat and they'd be quite comfortable, but if you need to put a third one in the middle, that's also doable, guys, but it's going to be a bit tight. Now, for toys, this is the base model EcoSport Trend, so don't expect to get too much toys here. We do get a few though, So let's start with those that we don't get. We don't get cup holders, we don't get a center armrest, we don't get a USB charging port. However, we do get a 12-volt charging outlet that's found at the side of the right side rear passenger, which is a bit of a weird position, but at least it's there. It should also help you power some devices like, for example, an air compressor if you need to like put air in a flat tire or something like that. Now, I also like that Ford threw in a dome light here at the back, which helps to illuminate the rear passengers and also the trunk area. So those are actually good points for the EcoSport. Now, another thing I notice here is the fact that the lock and unlock buttons are centrally located here at the back of the center console. And this is quite easy to reach for small kids. So if you have small kids that are going to be here at the back seat, make sure that they're properly strapped in and make sure that you make use of the child lock that's available on the rear doors, just to keep everything safe, guys. Alright guys, so we're now behind the wheel of the Ford Ecosport Trend. Is it EcoSport or EcoSport? Let me know in the comments below, guys, because honestly I don't really know. Although in my ears, EcoSport sounds more refined. But anyway, while driving this tiny crossover, I've noticed that the visibility is a bit compromised by the fact that we've got a steeply raked back windshield and the dashboard is mounted a bit higher up than normal or than the other comparative budget city crossovers out there. Now the good thing though is the seats kind of offset that compromised visibility a little bit, because the seats are mounted pretty high up and the seating position is pretty good, it's pretty high. I feel like I'm driving a much taller vehicle than what the EcoSport would suggest. However, another tiny niggle here is the Trend, the EcoSport Trend. I'm not sure if the titanium has this also. Sports side mirrors that have a portion that has a concave mirror on it. So this kind of disorients me a little bit when I'm driving this thing and makes changing lanes a little bit more of a challenge, at least for me, based on my experience. Now coming to this location, I went through the highway, and one thing I noticed that since the EcoSport has a higher ground clearance of 209 millimeters and we have quite a short wheelbase, when I reach triple digit speeds, which is 100 kilometers per hour, the EcoSport was kind of jittery. It was kind of unsettled at highway speeds, and I also felt that some strong winds were buffeting the vehicle from the side. So because of the combination of the high ground clearance plus the short wheelbase, the EcoSport kind of feels unsettled at faster speeds or higher speeds. However, when you're just toodling around town, well within city speed limits, the EcoSport is such a capable performer. I love the fact that Ford tuned this 6-speed automatic transmission to give you enough low-end grunt to haul, let's say, a full load of passengers inside your car plus a full trunk. This won't give you any problems when you're negotiating inclines like what we're going through now. Granted, I'm just a solo passenger here inside, but see, the transmission downshifts to give you the right level of engine speed, and it could easily haul its body weight, its mass, climbing up this inclined road. That's not a problem at all. Now, another surprising bit about the EcoSport is the fact that when I'm driving it, despite being a front-wheel drive city crossover, it feels like I'm driving a small truck. The steering feel is hefty. It's nicely weighted. It doesn't feel like an electric power assist system. This thing feels like pretty similar to the power steering feel of, let's say, the Suzuki Jimny. It's like I'm driving a small SUV. Now, another thing that I noticed is the suspension tuning also feels like a truck. That doesn't mean that it's, it's uncomfortable, that it's bumpy. It's not. It's very crossover-like when it comes to paved roads like this. But I do notice that when I take a corner pretty aggressively, the car has a tendency to float. There's a good amount of body roll that could be felt. See, this is not even a curving road, and yet there's a good amount of body roll. And I believe this is mainly because of that high ground clearance. Since Ford built the EcoSport to ride and feel like a mini SUV, then the suspension handling and tuning is pretty similar to a small SUV. Now, when it comes to safety, the EcoSport Trend, despite being a base model, is no slouch. We get dual front and side airbags, we get ABS with EBD, traction control, and stability control. Now, that's not so bad when it comes to this budget mini crossover. Overall, guys, the fact that the EcoSport has a tall riding position and a small footprint makes it so easy and predictable to drive. The fact that it has a good level of safety kit and a good amount of practical space means that it is pretty much a perfect starter car for the first-time car buyer. Just don't expect it to hold its breath if you're going to take it to, let's say, triple-digit speeds, and you'll be all right. So how does the Ford EcoSport stack up against the competition? Well, it may not be the most tech-savvy small crossover out in the market, nor does it have the softest cabin materials inside. It gives you just what you need and not what you want, but it does so in a handsome SUV-styled package that is quite easy to drive. At the end of the day, the combination of its solid level of safety kit, its easy and predictable drive, and a global name backing it up is more than enough to keep the Ford EcoSport at the top of the pack. Thanks for watching.